February 3, 1943. Outskirts of Guadalcanal. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Bennett stared through her binoculars as the 155 Long Tom. Artillery pieces fired in succession, the thunder of their discharge rolling across the jungle-covered hills. She watched as the shells arced high into the sky, disappearing from view long before reaching their targets, Japanese fortifications that none of her forward observers could even see. Miles away, explosions erupted with pinpoint precision, decimating enemy positions that had believed themselves safely beyond the reach of American firepower. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The hand of Colonel Hiroshi Tanaka trembled as he examined the crater analysis report submitted by his engineering officer. The document confirmed what seemed impossible. American artillery had struck their command post from a distance of 3 miles. Well beyond anything the Imperial Japanese Army believed possible on a battlefield. While Japanese Type 95 howitzers struggled to reach 9 miles with their heaviest charges, these American weapons had casually erased that limitation, rendering what Tanaka had considered safe distance into a deadly miscalculation. Sir, the analysis is conclusive, Lieutenant Akira Matsuda reported, his voice strained with professional concern. The shell fragments match the American 145 artillery. They struck us from positions we confirmed through aerial reconnaissance to be at least 23 kilometers away. Colonel Tanaka's jaw tightened as he absorbed this information. The lieutenant continued, "Our own artillery cannot respond. They are firing from completely outside our range." For Colonel Tanaka, this revelation was more than tactical information. It was the shattering of a fundamental military assumption. Imperial Army doctrine had been built around artillery ranges that suddenly seemed quaintly obsolete. His men were being targeted with impunity by weapons they couldn't hope to counter. It was as if an opponent in a sword duel had suddenly produced a pistol. The first hints of America's revolutionary artillery capability had emerged during the Guadalcanal campaign in late 1942. Japanese survivors from the 38th Division reported artillery bombardments from invisible sources, shells appearing from distances that defied their understanding of battlefield physics. Initial reports were dismissed as battle hysteria or exaggeration. The Tokyo General Staff refused to believe American artillery technology could so dramatically outclass their own. These first accounts came from Lieutenant Yoshiro Saito, whose platoon had held a strategic ridge until what he described as thunder from beyond the horizon systematically destroyed their positions. When interrogated by his superiors about why he hadn't ordered counter-battery fire, his answer was simple and devastating. There was nothing to target. The Americans were firing from another world. The Long Tom 155 gun represented something beyond Japanese comprehension. Developed in the interwar years as a replacement for World War I-era French artillery, the weapon could hurl a 95-pound high-explosive shell up to 3 miles 23 kilometers, with remarkable accuracy. Each gun crew consisted of a disciplined team of 14 soldiers who could fire 2 rounds per minute, creating a continuous rain of precision destruction that Japanese forces couldn't escape and couldn't answer. By comparison, the standard Japanese type 95 howitzer had a maximum range of 98 yards, just over 6 miles. Even their heaviest field artillery, the Type 89 gun, topped out at 4 miles. This differential wasn't merely technical. It represented a fundamental asymmetry in industrial capability, engineering sophistication, and military doctrine that Japanese command had failed to anticipate. Colonel Tanaka's intelligence officer, Captain Kenji Nakamura, compiled a comprehensive assessment of American artillery capabilities that painted a devastating picture. The Americans deployed artillery in integrated battalions with sophisticated fire control systems. Forward observers equipped with SCR 68 radio sets could call in fire missions instantly, adjusting aim through rapid feedback. Japanese artillery relied on field telephones that frequently failed in jungle conditions and required long setup times. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The Miedon Long Tom was just one part of America's artillery revolution. The M205 howitzer could be rapidly deployed, firing 33-pound shells to 1200 yards, still outranging most Japanese pieces. The M305 howitzer mounted on the M7 Priest self-propelled gun carriage provided mobile firepower that could keep pace with advancing infantry. And behind all these weapons stood America's industrial might. By 1943, American factories produced more artillery ammunition in a month than Japan could manufacture in a year. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Bennett understood this advantage better than most. As an artillery officer trained at Fort Sill before the war, she had helped develop the fire direction techniques that now devastated Japanese positions across the Pacific. Her battalion of Long Toms had become legendary among American infantry, who called them the Hand of God for their ability to deliver destruction to seemingly unreachable enemy positions. The Japanese simply don't understand what they're facing, Bennett explained to a war correspondent visiting her fire direction center. This isn't just about range. It's about an entire system, meteorological data, surveying techniques, communications, and industrial capacity. We can hit any target within our range circle within minutes of receiving coordinates, day or night, in any weather. They're fighting the last war while we're fighting with technology they never imagined. The correspondent watched as Bennett's fire direction center operated like a well-oiled machine. Calculations that would have taken hours in World War I were completed in minutes. Meteorological data accounting for wind, temperature, and humidity was factored into firing solutions. The correspondent had never seen such a sophisticated blend of mathematics and firepower. On January 15, 1943, the power of American artillery was demonstrated dramatically during the final stages of the Guadalcanal campaign. The Japanese 38th Division had established what they considered an impregnable position on a ridge beyond the range of conventional artillery. Colonel Takeo Ito, commanding the position, had assured Tokyo that his men could hold indefinitely against American infantry assaults. At 5:30 hours, Lieutenant Colonel Bennett's battalion of Miedon 155 guns began firing. Over the next 4 hours, they delivered 340 high-explosive shells onto the Japanese positions. Each gun crew maintained a disciplined rate of fire, barrel cooling procedures, and regular position adjustments to prevent counter-battery targeting. The bombardment pulverized the Japanese fortifications, destroyed their ammunition dumps, cut their communications, and eliminated their heavy weapons. What Japanese survivors later described wasn't just destruction, but psychological devastation. There was no warning, no visible enemy, just sudden explosions that continued relentlessly. Major Toshiro Yamada, one of the few officers to survive, later wrote in his diary, "The Americans have conquered distance itself. They kill from beyond the horizon with mathematical precision. How does one fight an enemy one cannot reach?" The psychological impact on Japanese forces was profound. Artillery, historically respected but considered one tactical element among many, suddenly became an existential threat that could not be countered. Japanese infantry units began abandoning positions when they detected American forward observers, knowing what would follow. The awareness of vulnerability to weapons, they couldn't fight back against eroded morale across entire divisions. By February 1943, Japanese High Command had finally accepted the reality of American artillery superiority. General Harukichi Hyakutake, commander of the 17th Army, sent an urgent assessment to Imperial General Headquarters. American artillery represents not merely a tactical advantage, but a strategic revolution. Their ability to strike with impunity from beyond our maximum range undermines our entire defensive doctrine. We must either develop comparable weapons or fundamentally alter our tactical approach. The Japanese attempted several responses. The Army Technical Bureau accelerated development of the Type 96-150 howitzer with extended range. Field commanders adapted by dispersing forces more widely and constructing deeper underground shelters. Infantry units were trained to identify and target American forward observers as their highest priority. None of these measures adequately addressed the fundamental imbalance. Lieutenant Colonel Bennett understood how the range advantage translated into battlefield dominance. Artillery isn't just about destruction, she explained to her battery commanders. It's about controlling the battlefield. The Japanese can't maneuver during daylight because we can see them from observation posts and aircraft, then hit them within minutes from positions they can't counter. We're dictating when and where they can move, eating into their supplies, disrupting their communications, and shattering their morale, all while remaining untouchable. The disparity wasn't just in range, but in sophistication. American artillery operated as an integrated system. The Fire Direction Center, FDC, for each battalion coordinated fire from multiple batteries, allocating targets based on priority and optimizing ammunition expenditure. Japanese artillery typically operated as individual batteries without centralized control, severely limiting their effectiveness against multiple or moving targets. Colonel Tanaka struggled to explain this devastating advantage to his superiors in Tokyo. In a classified memo that would later be captured in the Philippines, he wrote, "The Americans have transformed artillery from a supporting arm to the decisive factor on the battlefield. Their ability to coordinate fire from multiple batteries onto single targets creates destruction beyond anything we have experienced. They can shift fire across entire sectors in minutes, preventing any effective concentration of our forces." Japanese artillery officers, trained in doctrine that emphasized close support of infantry, found themselves facing an enemy that used artillery as a dominant, independent force. Captain Masao Fujimoto, artillery officer with the Dwand Infantry Division, reported after the Battle of Tarawa. "American guns created a mathematical grid of death across our positions. Every approach, every bunker, every possible reinforcement route was pre-targeted. They fired with a precision that suggested they could see through the very earth. The superiority wasn't merely technical but philosophical. American artillery doctrine had evolved to emphasize what they called time on target, multiple batteries firing so their shells would arrive simultaneously, maximizing shock effect and preventing the enemy from taking cover after the first impacts. Japanese artillery, with its limited communication infrastructure and decentralized command, could not achieve such coordination. By mid-1943, American artillery dominance had become a cornerstone of Pacific strategy. Admiral Chester Nimitz noted in a staff meeting, "Our ability to strike enemy positions beyond their ability to respond has fundamentally altered the calculation of amphibious operations. We can neutralize defensive positions before landing forces, dramatically reducing casualties and accelerating timetables. For Japanese commanders, the psychological impact of facing an enemy with such overwhelming firepower advantage created a crisis of confidence. General Tomoyuki Yamashita, who would later command the defense of the Philippines, acknowledged this reality in his private journals. Their guns reach us when ours cannot reach them. This is not merely tactical disadvantage, it is like fighting an opponent who can see in darkness while we are blind." The range disparity was most dramatically demonstrated during the Battle of Peleliu in September 1944. Japanese forces under Colonel Kunio Nakagawa had prepared extensive defensive positions across the island, including artillery emplacements they believed were securely positioned beyond American naval gun range. What they hadn't accounted for was the deployment of Lieutenant Colonel Bennett's 155 guns on nearby islands before the main assault. 3 days before the Marine landing, Bennett's batteries began methodical destruction of Japanese positions that believed themselves safe. Forward observers on light aircraft adjusted fire in real time, creating a precision bombardment that Japanese survivors described as supernatural in its accuracy. When captured artillery officers were interrogated about why they hadn't returned fire, their response was telling, "Your guns were ghosts. We could not see them, could not range them, could not touch them. American artillery superiority represented something beyond Japanese comprehension, not just technological edge, but industrial capacity applied to warfare. While Japanese factories struggled to produce enough shells to maintain basic training schedules, American artillery units in the Pacific received a seemingly endless supply of ammunition. The 150 guns fired more shells in single operations than entire Japanese divisions had available for campaigns. Lieutenant Colonel Bennett recognized this psychological dimension. Artillery isn't just about killing enemy soldiers, she explained to her battery commanders. It's about controlling the battlefield mentally. When the enemy knows they can be struck with precision from beyond their maximum range, it constrains every decision they make. They can't mass forces, can't establish secure command posts, can't move in daylight. We're not just destroying their bodies, we're paralyzing their decision-making capacity. The battle for Okinawa in April-June, 1945, represented the culmination of American artillery dominance. Defending Japanese forces under Lieutenant General Mitsuru Ushijima had prepared extensive underground positions specifically designed to survive artillery bombardment. This adaptation represented their final evolution in response to American firepower advantage, abandoning the surface to control subterranean space. Lieutenant Colonel Bennett's 155 guns were deployed in unprecedented numbers for this final campaign. Extachari Corps artillery alone controlled 324 guns, which delivered over 1 million rounds during the 82-day battle. Their time-on-target concentrations became increasingly sophisticated, with as many as 24 batteries, 288 guns, firing simultaneously to ensure shells arrived on target within a 5-second window. Even these extensive preparations proved inadequate against American artillery capabilities. Forward observers with the advancing infantry called precise fire missions that systematically eliminated Japanese cave entrances and ventilation shafts. Artillery radar detected Japanese guns the moment they fired, enabling immediate counter-battery response. Aerial observers directed fire onto positions invisible from ground level. The result was a three-dimensional artillery dominance that left no safe space for Japanese forces. Japanese General Isamu Cho, Ushijima's chief of staff, recorded in his final diary entry, "The Americans have created perfect artillery. They see everything, reach everywhere, destroy with scientific precision. Our adaptations merely delay the inevitable. We face not just superior weapons but a superior understanding of how to employ them. This is not merely combat, it is technological annihilation." For Lieutenant Colonel Bennett, Okinawa represented both professional vindication and personal tragedy. Her theories about artillery employment had been confirmed through battlefield dominance, but at tremendous human cost. As she toured captured Japanese positions after the battle, she was struck by what the enemy had endured: the shattered bunkers, the collapsed tunnels, the evidence of men who had lived their final days under constant threat of instant annihilation from an enemy they couldn't fight back against. "This isn't the warfare any of us imagined," she confided to her executive officer. "We've created a battlefield where courage and sacrifice mean nothing against industrial capacity and mathematical precision. The Japanese never understood what they were facing, not just better guns, but an entirely different concept of warfare." Statistical comparison of artillery effectiveness on Okinawa tells the complete story. American forces fired approximately 2,914 artillery rounds during the campaign. Japanese forces fired fewer than 190 rounds in response. American counter-battery radar and sound-ranging units detected and silenced 95% of Japanese artillery within minutes of their first firing. By the campaign's final weeks, Japanese artillery had been effectively eliminated as a fighting force. For Japanese commanders, Okinawa represented the final confirmation of a disparity they had struggled to overcome throughout the Pacific War. Colonel Hiromichi Yahara, Ushijima's operations officer and one of the few senior officers to survive, wrote in his post-war memoir, The American artillery advantage was not merely tactical, but strategic. It rendered our entire defensive concept obsolete. We could not fight on equal terms, could not maneuver effectively, could not protect our forces. This was not defeat, it was obsolescence. Lieutenant Colonel Bennett's assessment proved equally stark. The Japanese never developed an answer to our artillery dominance, she noted in her after-action report. Their adaptations, deeper bunkers, dispersed forces, night operations, were tactical adjustments to a strategic problem. They never addressed the fundamental disparity in our ability to deliver precision firepower beyond their maximum range. This wasn't just winning battles, it was winning a competition they never truly entered. The legacy of this artillery disparity shaped post-war Japanese military thinking. The self-defense forces established after occupation prioritized mobility, dispersion, and technological sophistication, rejecting the static defense concepts that had proven so vulnerable to American artillery. Their analysis acknowledged what Japanese commanders had learned too late, that industrial capacity properly applied to warfare creates advantages spirit alone cannot overcome. For Lieutenant Colonel Bennett, who would continue serving through the Korean War before retiring as a full colonel in 1955, the lessons were clear. Artillery dominance wasn't achieved through any single breakthrough, she explained to military historians documenting the Pacific Campaign. It came through systematic integration of technology, tactics, training, and industrial capacity. We didn't just outrange the Japanese, we outthought them, creating a system they couldn't match, even if they had possessed comparable weapons. The story of American artillery dominance and Japanese shock at the 155 guns 14-mile range reveals a fundamental truth about modern warfare. The greatest courage, or the most noble sacrifice, but to those who harness industrial and technological advantages most effectively. The Japanese never lacked bravery. They lacked the capacity to transform industrial might into battlefield dominance on the scale their opponents achieved. This ammunition abundance created another psychological advantage. Japanese units learned that American bombardments didn't slacken due to supply constraints. What began as a barrage might continue for hours or even days without reduction in intensity. This relentlessness broke units that might have withstood conventional bombardments, knowing that taking cover was only a temporary reprieve. Lieutenant Colonel Bennett's artillery battalion demonstrated this advantage during the battle for Leyte. Her 155 guns fired continuously for 72 hours, delivering over 10.0 shells onto Japanese defensive positions. Each gun crew operated in shifts, maintaining mechanical precision despite exhaustion and occasional enemy counterfire. When infantry finally advanced, they found positions reduced to rubble and survivors in various states of shock, many unable to effectively resist. Colonel Tanaka, by now promoted to command an entire regiment, wrote a final assessment for Imperial headquarters that captured the futility of their situation. The American artillery advantage represents not a failure of Japanese spirit, but a fundamental industrial disparity. Their guns outrange ours by 50%. Their ammunition supply is effectively unlimited. Their fire control systems operate with scientific precision. Our gunners can only envy. This is not a battle of equals. The legacy of this artillery disparity shaped the final stages of the Pacific War. Japanese forces increasingly abandoned conventional defensive positions in favor of cave complexes and underground fortifications that offered some protection against American firepower. This shift, while providing temporary shelter, ultimately ceded control of the battlefield and limited offensive options. For Lieutenant Colonel Bennett, the lessons were clear. Artillery isn't just about explosives and steel. She told a group of replacement officers joining her battalion in early 1945. It's about creating a mathematical certainty of destruction that saps the enemy's will to resist. When they know they can be struck without ability to strike back, when every movement might trigger precise devastation from an unseen enemy, their options become impossible. We're not just destroying their bodies, we're breaking their concept of warfare itself. By 1945, American artillery dominance had become so complete that Japanese tactical doctrine had fundamentally transformed. Units were instructed to disperse widely, avoid any concentration of forces that might attract artillery fire, and engage only at extremely close range, where American advantages might be neutralized. This approach, while occasionally effective, surrendered strategic initiative and allowed American forces to dictate the pace and location of engagements. The statistics tell the complete story of two nations fighting with entirely different understandings of modern warfare. American production of 155 guns reached over 750 pieces by war's end. Shell production exceeded 38 million rounds for this caliber alone. Each infantry division deployed 54 howitzers and 455 guns, howitzers, providing overlapping fields of fire that could concentrate devastating firepower on any target within range. Japanese response to America's artillery superiority was slow and inadequate. Colonel Tanaka convened an emergency meeting with his surviving officers in an underground bunker hardened against the American 155 shells. Their faces reflected the grim reality of their situation, hollow-eyed from sleep deprivation, shoulders slumped from the psychological burden of constant bombardment. "We must adapt or perish," Tanaka told them, his voice steady, despite the distant rumble of American guns that never seemed to fall silent. The Americans aren't just firing artillery. They've created an entirely new form of warfare our training never prepared us for. Captain Nakamura, now Tanaka's chief of staff, spread reconnaissance photographs across the crude wooden table. Their fire direction capabilities are unlike anything we've seen. They're using coordinated observation posts, meteorological data, and mathematical firing tables that account for every variable. It's not just about range. It's about precision, coordination, and industrial capacity. For Japanese officers trained to value spirit over technology, American artillery represented a paradigm shift they struggled to comprehend. Captain Fujimoto, their artillery liaison, had analyzed shell fragments recovered from impact sites. "The metallurgical quality is extraordinary," he reported. "Their fuses are precision manufactured to detonate at exact heights for maximum effect. Our foundries can't match this quality even at reduced production rates." Lieutenant General Renya Mutaguchi, commanding the 15th Army in Burma, had dismissed initial reports about American artillery capabilities as exaggerations. No artillery can be effective beyond 10 miles, he had insisted during a staff conference in late 1943. "Our type 89-150 mgun remains adequate for any battlefield application." This confidence evaporated when his headquarters received direct hits from American 155 guns positioned 22 yards away, completely beyond Japanese counter-battery capacity. The reality of American artillery dominance forced a complete reassessment of Japanese defensive doctrine. Colonel Junichi Tanigawa, an instructor at the Imperial Japanese Army War College, prepared a classified analysis that circulated among senior officers in early 1944. "American artillery represents not merely a technical advantage but a revolution in warfare," he wrote. "Their ability to deliver precise, coordinated fire from beyond our maximum range undermines all conventional defensive principles." Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Bennett understood the psychological impact of her battalion's capabilities. "The Japanese are fighting the last war," she explained to newly arrived replacement officers. "They're experiencing what the Germans faced in 1918 when Allied artillery dominance broke their ability to maneuver. But we've taken that advantage and multiplied it through technological innovation they simply can't match." Bennett's 155 batteries had achieved near-mythical status among American infantry. Private First Class Michael Reynolds of the Yedenst Marine Division wrote home, "When those long toms start singing, it's like God himself decided to punish the Japanese. They hit targets we can't even see, places the enemy thought were safe. The Japs call them the invisible death because there's no warning, just sudden destruction from beyond the horizon." American artillery doctrine had evolved dramatically during the interwar years, with officers like Bennett at the forefront of innovation. Fire direction centers, centralized control of multiple batteries, allowing mass concentration of fire on priority targets. Flash ranging and sound detection units precisely located enemy guns. Meteorological sections provided real-time data on wind and atmospheric conditions. Together, these advances transformed artillery from supporting arms into the decisive battlefield element. By contrast, Japanese artillery remained locked in World War I concepts. Their doctrine emphasized direct support of infantry rather than deep strikes. Communication relied primarily on field telephones rather than radio networks. Fire control was decentralized at battery level, with minimal coordination between units. These limitations became fatal flaws when facing an enemy that could strike with impunity from beyond their maximum range. The story of Captain Hiroshi Matsuda illustrates the devastating impact of this disparity. Commanding a company of the elite Dwand Imperial Guards Division on Leyte, Matsuda had positioned his men according to traditional doctrine, controlling high ground with interlocking fields of fire. His unit had repelled 3 American infantry assaults with minimal casualties, strengthening his confidence in Japanese defensive principles. On November 5, 1944, Lieutenant Colonel Bennett's 155 batteries received targeting information from a forward observer who had spotted Matsuda's position. Within 20 minutes, a fire mission was calculated, accounting for distance, elevation, wind speed, and humidity. At 1435 hours, 1255 guns fired simultaneously, their shells timed to arrive on target within a 3-second window. The Japanese position, considered impregnable against infantry, disappeared under a precision barrage that continued for 45 minutes. Of Matsuda's 140 men, 97 became casualties in the first 10 minutes. Survivors described the experience as apocalyptic. The earth itself seemed to erupt without warning, bunkers collapsed, ammunition cooked off, communications disappeared. When American infantry advanced after the barrage, they found the position unrecognizable and the surviving Japanese too disoriented to mount effective resistance. The psychological impact extended beyond immediate casualties. Lieutenant Shigeru Nakamura, who survived the bombardment, wrote in his journal, "We fight an enemy we cannot reach, cannot see, cannot strike back against. They kill from a different world, beyond our horizons." How does one maintain fighting spirit against such an imbalance? This is not warfare as we understand it, it is industrial slaughter. Colonel Tanaka recognized the strategic implications. The Americans have created a one-sided battlefield, he reported to Tokyo. Their ability to deliver precise destruction from beyond our maximum range means we cannot hold fixed positions, cannot mass our forces, cannot safely establish command centers or supply dumps within 25 kilometers of their forward elements. This forces a fundamental reconsideration of our entire defensive concept. Japanese attempts to counter American artillery advantage revealed the depth of the disparity. The Technical Research Institute rushed development of the type 550 howitzer with extended range, but metallurgical limitations and production constraints meant only 12 were manufactured by war's end. Engineers designed concrete bunkers specifically to withstand 155 impacts, but each required 28 tons of concrete, unavailable to forward units. Most telling was the Japanese response to Lieutenant Colonel Bennett's fire direction methods. When captured documents revealed the mathematical precision of American targeting, the Imperial General Staff ordered implementation of similar systems. The response from field artillery commanders was immediate and unanimous. They lacked the calculating machines, the meteorological instruments, the communications equipment, and the trained personnel to replicate American methods. For Bennett, this confirmed her pre-war theories about artillery employment. "The decisive factor isn't the gun itself," she explained during a staff conference in Manila. "It's the entire system, the fire direction center, the observer network, the communication grid, the meteorological data, the survey techniques, the ammunition logistics. We've created an integrated approach that multiplies the effectiveness of each individual weapon." The battle for Iwo Jima in February 1945 demonstrated this integration at its peak. Japanese General Tadamichi Kuribayashi had studied American artillery capabilities and adapted his defenses accordingly, dispersing his forces in deep underground positions specifically designed to withstand bombardment. This represented the most sophisticated Japanese response to American firepower advantage. Lieutenant Colonel Bennett's 155 guns were positioned on warships offshore, creating a mobile artillery platform that could deliver fire support across the entire island. During the 36-hour pre-landing bombardment, these guns fired 22 shells with precision that astonished even veteran observers. Their ability to shift fire rapidly between widely separated targets prevented Japanese forces from concentrating anywhere on the surface. What made the American artillery system particularly devastating was its integration with other arms. Forward observers with infantry called fire missions directly to the Fire Direction Center. Aerial observers in light aircraft adjusted fire onto targets invisible from ground level. Naval gunfire support officers coordinated ship-based artillery with land-based guns. The result was a seamless web of firepower that could be concentrated on any point within range within minutes. Japanese survivors from Iwo Jima provided testimony that revealed the psychological impact of this integration. Lieutenant Kiyoshi Endo, captured after the battle, told interrogators, "The American artillery seemed omniscient. If our men moved, shells found them. If we gathered to counterattack, destruction arrived before orders were completed. If we fired our own artillery, American counter-battery fire silenced it within minutes. It was as if they could see through the earth itself." Colonel Tanaka had studied American artillery development since before the war. As a military attaché in Washington during 1940–41, he had observed demonstrations of early fire direction techniques at Fort Sill. His reports to Tokyo had warned about potential American advantages, but were dismissed as exaggerating capabilities that remained theoretical. Now, as his men died under precision bombardment from weapons they couldn't counter, his warnings seemed tragically prescient. "We fundamentally misunderstood American character," Tanaka wrote in a final assessment before being killed during the POD, Philippines campaign. "We believed their industrial might would make them soft, dependent on technology rather than fighting spirit. What we failed to grasp was how they would apply that industrial capacity to warfare, not replacing spirit with technology, but amplifying it through scientific application on a scale we cannot match." For Lieutenant Colonel Bennett, the evolution of artillery employment represented her life's work vindicated through combat effectiveness. Her pre-war theories about centralized fire direction, the integration of meteorological data, and the psychological impact of time-on-target concentrations had been confirmed across dozens of island battles. When asked by a war correspondent about the secret to American artillery superiority, her answer was characteristically precise. "There is no secret," she said. "It's mathematics, industrial capacity, and organizational discipline applied to warfare. We've created a system where a forward observer with a radio can deliver the equivalent of a bombing raid onto any target within 25.0 yards within minutes." The Japanese never developed a comparable system because they didn't prioritize artillery as a decisive arm. Statistical comparison revealed the magnitude of the disparity. By 1945, American forces in the Pacific had 8,400 artillery pieces of 105 or larger caliber. Japan had deployed fewer than 800 comparable weapons across all theaters. American monthly production of artillery ammunition reached 3.5 million rounds by 1944. Japanese production never exceeded 180 rounds per month. Each American division deployed 54-105 howitzers and 12-24-155 guns. Japanese divisions typically had 36-105 howitzers and 12-150 pieces, with significantly shorter ranges. Beyond numbers, the qualitative gap was even more pronounced. American artillery incorporated hydraulic recoil systems, split-trail carriages, and high-quality steel that allowed sustained firing without barrel wear or mechanical failure. Japanese artillery increasingly relied on lower-grade metals as strategic materials became scarce, resulting in reduced range, accuracy, and barrel life. The disparity was perhaps most evident in fire control equipment. American units deployed the MG plotting board, range finders, calibrated aiming circles, and sophisticated communication systems that enabled coordinated fire from multiple batteries. Japanese units continued to rely primarily on direct observation, manual calculations, and field telephones, methods that American artillery had abandoned as obsolete by 1940. For Japanese infantry facing this technological mismatch, the psychological impact often exceeded the physical destruction. Captain Toshikazu Kase, who survived the artillery bombardment on Saipan, later wrote, "The American guns created an environment of total vulnerability. There was no safe place, no respite, no moment when one could relax vigilance. The knowledge that death could arrive without warning, from an enemy beyond our reach, broke something fundamental in even the most dedicated soldiers." Lieutenant Colonel Bennett recognized this psychological dimension. "Artillery isn't just about killing enemy soldiers," she explained to her battery commanders. "It's about controlling the battlefield mentally. When the enemy knows they can be struck with precision from beyond their maximum range, it constrains every decision they make. They can't mass forces, can't establish secure command posts, can't move in daylight. We're not just destroying their bodies, we're paralyzing their decision-making capacity." The battle for Okinawa in April-June 1945 represented the culmination of American artillery dominance. Defending Japanese forces under Lieutenant General Mitsuru Ushijima had prepared extensive underground positions specifically designed to survive artillery bombardment. This adaptation represented their final evolution in response to American firepower advantage, abandoning the surface to control subterranean space. Lieutenant Colonel Bennett's 155 guns were deployed in unprecedented numbers for this final campaign. 67 Corps artillery alone controlled 324 guns, which delivered over 1 million rounds during the 82-day battle. Their time-on-target concentrations became increasingly sophisticated, with as many as 24 batteries, 288 guns, firing simultaneously to ensure shells arrived on target within a 5-second window. Even these extensive preparations proved inadequate against American artillery capabilities. Forward observers with the advancing infantry called precise fire missions that systematically eliminated Japanese cave entrances and ventilation shafts. Artillery radar detected Japanese guns the moment they fired, enabling immediate counter-battery response. Aerial observers directed fire onto positions invisible from ground level. The result was a three-dimensional artillery dominance that left no safe space for Japanese forces. Japanese General Izumo Cho, Ushijima's chief of staff, recorded in his final diary entry, "The Americans have created perfect artillery. They see everything, reach everywhere, destroy with scientific precision. Our adaptations merely delay the inevitable. We face not just superior weapons, but a superior understanding of how to employ them. This is not merely combat, it is technological annihilation." For Lieutenant Colonel Bennett, Okinawa represented both professional vindication and personal tragedy. Her theories about artillery employment had been confirmed through battlefield dominance, but at tremendous human cost. As she toured captured Japanese positions after the battle, she was struck by what the enemy had endured: the shattered bunkers, the collapsed tunnels, the evidence of men who had lived their final days under constant threat of instant annihilation from an enemy they couldn't fight back against. "This isn't the warfare any of us imagined," she confided, and to her executive officer. "We've created a battlefield where courage and sacrifice mean nothing against industrial capacity and mathematical precision. The Japanese never understood what they were facing, not just better guns, but an entirely different concept of warfare." Statistical comparison of artillery effectiveness on Okinawa tells the complete story. American forces fired approximately 914 artillery rounds during the campaign. Japanese forces fired fewer than 190, 0 rounds in response. American counter-battery radar and sound-ranging units detected and silenced 95% of Japanese artillery within minutes of their first firing. By the campaign's final weeks, Japanese artillery had been effectively eliminated as a fighting force. For Japanese commanders, Okinawa represented the final confirmation of a disparity they had struggled to overcome throughout the Pacific War. Colonel Hiromichi Yahara, Ushijima's operations officer and one of the few senior officers to survive, wrote in his post-war memoir, "The American artillery advantage was not merely tactical but strategic. It rendered our entire defensive concept obsolete. We could not fight on equal terms, could not maneuver effectively, could not protect our forces. This was not defeat, it was obsolescence." Lieutenant Colonel Bennett's assessment proved equally stark. "The Japanese never developed an answer to our artillery dominance," she noted in her after-action report. "Their adaptations, deeper bunkers, dispersed forces, night operations, were tactical adjustments to a strategic problem. They never addressed the fundamental disparity in our ability to deliver precision firepower beyond their maximum range. This wasn't just winning battles. It was winning a competition they never truly entered." The legacy of this artillery disparity shaped post-war Japanese military thinking. The self-defense forces established after occupation prioritized mobility, dispersion, and technological sophistication, rejecting the static defense concepts that had proven so vulnerable to American artillery. Their analysis acknowledged what Japanese commanders had learned too late: that industrial capacity, properly applied to warfare, creates advantages spirit alone cannot overcome. For Lieutenant Colonel Bennett, who would continue serving through the Korean War before retiring as a full colonel in 1955, the lessons were clear. Artillery dominance wasn't achieved through any single breakthrough, she explained to military historians documenting the Pacific Campaign. It came through systematic integration of technology, tactics, training, and industrial capacity. We didn't just outrange the Japanese. We outthought them, creating a system they couldn't match even if they had possessed comparable weapons. The story of American artillery dominance and Japanese shock at the 155 guns 14,000 range reveals a fundamental truth about modern warfare, that victory belongs not to the side with the greatest courage or the most noble sacrifice, but to those who harness industrial and technological advantages most effectively. The Japanese never lacked bravery. They lacked the capacity to transform industrial might into battlefield dominance on the scale their opponents achieved. In the final analysis, the statistics tell the complete story of two nations fighting with entirely different understandings of warfare. American artillery, 400 pieces of 105 or larger, in the Pacific by 1945. Japanese artillery, fewer than 800 comparable weapons across all theaters. American monthly production, 5 million artillery rounds by 1944. Japanese monthly production, never exceeded 180, 0 rounds. American range advantage, 50% greater than comparable Japanese weapons. The outcome wasn't just military defeat, it was the collision of industrial ages, a nation still valuing individual heroism facing an opponent that had mastered industrial-scale destruction. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Bennett's 155 guns, firing their 95-pound high-explosive shells across 3 miles with mathematical precision, weren't just weapons. They were proof of a civilization that had fundamentally transformed warfare. The Japanese officers who first documented these capabilities weren't just recording tactical intelligence. They were witnessing the obsolescence of everything they had been taught about combat. In the face of such disparity, courage and sacrifice became tragic rather than decisive, qualities to be honored in memory rather than factors that could determine victory. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.